In the winter of 1987, three close friends, Adil, Bilal and Samir, planned an adventurous hiking trip into the remote and majestic mountains of northern Pakistan. They were nature lovers, passionate about exploring untouched trails, and known for their deep bond with one another. With backpacks full of supplies and spirits high, they set off to experience the beauty and peace of the wilderness. The weather forecast at the time predicted clear skies. There was no warning of danger. Locals in the nearby village remembered seeing the three young men heading confidently toward the mountain trail. But just 3 days into their journey, something unexpected happened, a violent and sudden snowstorm. This wasn't an ordinary storm. It came without warning and with such intensity that it covered the entire region in thick snow within hours. Visibility dropped to almost zero. The wind howled through the valleys and the temperature dropped far below freezing. Locals later described it as a storm unlike any they had seen before, wild, silent, and consuming. When the friends failed to return or make any contact, their families grew concerned. Search teams were sent into the mountains. Helicopters scanned the area from above. Ground teams hiked through dangerous terrain in bitter cold, calling out their names, hoping for a sign. But nothing was found. No footprints, no camping gear, no clothing, no bodies. It was as if the three friends had simply disappeared into thin air. The mystery grew heavier with time. How could three healthy, prepared young men vanish without leaving a single clue? No distress signals, no messages, no signs of injury or animal attack. Their last known location was lost in a sea of snow. As days turned into weeks and then months, the families were left heartbroken and confused. The case was eventually marked as closed due to severe weather disappearance, but no one truly believed it was that simple. The 1987 disappearance wasn't just a tragedy, it became a chilling mystery. It was a reminder that nature, especially the mountains, can be unpredictable, powerful, and at times deeply mysterious. The suddenness of the storm, the lack of warning, and the complete absence of evidence made this case unforgettable, leaving behind one haunting question. Where did the three friends go? When the violent storm finally passed in early 1987, the families of Adil, Bilal and Samir hoped they would receive word from the boys. Maybe a radio call from a mountain lodge or even a trek back into the village, exhausted but alive. But days turned into a heavy silence. No messages, no sightings, no signs. Panic quickly set in. Local authorities and volunteers launched a massive search and rescue operation. Helicopters scanned the snowy slopes from above, while trained mountaineers combed through icy trails, deep forests, and frozen cliffs on foot. They shouted the boys' names into the cold air, hoping to hear even a faint cry for help. But the silence was absolute. The only thing the rescuers found was untouched snow and wild terrain, no torn clothing, no abandoned supplies, no makeshift shelter, no footprints beyond the storm, as if nature had erased all evidence of their existence. The search intensified. Specialist teams from neighboring regions joined in, expanding the radius of exploration. Drones were used. Local guides who knew the mountains better than anyone retraced every possible route the boys might have taken. Still not a single clue was found. As the weeks dragged on, resources thinned and the harsh winter worsened. One by one, the teams had to turn back. The bitter truth began to set in. There was nothing more to be done, no trail to follow, no evidence to examine. For the families, this was the most painful part. Not having answers, not knowing whether to grieve or keep hoping. They were trapped in emotional limbo, unable to hold funerals, unable to let go, unable to move forward. By the end of the second month, the case was unofficially declared cold. Locals whispered prayers for the three friends, while the families clung to the smallest fragments of faith. What if they're still alive somewhere? What if they found shelter? What if they'll come home one day? telling stories of survival. But time is relentless. Seasons changed. Years passed. The mountain kept its silence. The disappearance of Adil, Bilal, and Samir became one of the most unsettling unsolved cases in the region, not because they died, but because they vanished without a trace, and that eerie lack of evidence left behind a scar that never fully healed. When the storm swallowed the three friends, Adil, Bilal, and Samir, in the winter of 1987, it didn't just take their physical presence, it took something even deeper: certainty. In the weeks that followed their disappearance, as search teams failed to recover any trace, their families found themselves in a state more painful than grief. It was emotional limbo, a place between about the silent storm, the myth of travelers taken by the mountains, never to return unless the peaks willed it. Some swore they had seen strange figures walking silently through the mists years ago, ghosts or spirits, they claimed. For the families, the discovery brought both comfort and pain. Comfort because something of their sons had been found. Pain because the mystery had deepened. The frozen tent in 1999 wasn't an answer, it was a message, a sign that they had made it to the top but never came down. And still, the mountains kept the final chapter of their story hidden in snow. When the frozen tent was unearthed in 1999, perched high on a windswept ridge in the Karakoram Mountains, it was as though time itself had paused. Despite being buried under snow and ice for 12 years, the inside of the tent told a story frozen in place, chilling in its silence and haunting in its detail. As the mountaineers carefully peeled back the half-zipped entrance, they were met with a scene that felt more like a preserved time capsule than a campsite. 3 sleeping bags lay neatly side by side, slightly frosted but perfectly aligned, as though the 3 friends, Adil, Bilal, and Samir, had gone to sleep one night and never woken up. But there were no bodies inside, no signs of distress, no torn fabric, no indication that they had left in a hurry. Next to one sleeping bag was a metal water bottle, still half full, now frozen solid like a small glacier in a container. A half-open journal was found beside another bag with faded handwriting that mentioned weather conditions and the altitude. The last written line simply read, "The wind is howling louder tonight." There was no final message, no goodbye, just routine notes about their hike. In a small pouch, a wristwatch lay still, its hands frozen at 2:17. Whether it had stopped from the cold or marked the last moment someone wore it, no one could say. A pair of gloves, a flashlight with dead batteries, and a tattered photo of the 3 friends, arms around each other, smiling at the base of a waterfall, were also discovered. What struck the rescue team most was how peaceful everything appeared. Nothing was broken, no signs of a struggle, wild animal intrusion, or avalanche damage. The tent itself, though weather-beaten, was largely intact. There was no chaos, no desperation, just stillness. And yet the absence of the bodies made it feel eerie, as if the owners had simply stepped outside and never returned. The kind of mystery that clings to the skin. Outside the tent, searchers discovered a few faint footprints, which stopped abruptly a few meters away in snow that appeared otherwise untouched by human presence. No trail led down the mountain, no gear was left behind, just the essentials, frozen in time. For the families, the discovery of the items brought a complex wave of emotions. Holding the photo in their hands was like reaching across time. The boys had been there. They had made it to that point. But what happened afterward? Speculations erupted, some logical, others supernatural. Hypothermia? A sudden disorientation in the snow? Did they try to descend and vanish in a crevasse? Or was something else at play? The tent offered clues, yes, but only in fragments. It was a picture with half the frame missing, and the missing half carried the answer everyone still longed for. In the end, the items inside that tent became sacred artifacts, reminders of a bond between friends, a journey interrupted, and a mystery carved into the heart of the mountains. As investigators and mountaineers carefully examined the frozen tent in 1999, one thing became strikingly clear: there were absolutely no signs of struggle or animal attack. In fact, the scene was almost too peaceful, and that eerie stillness only deepened the mystery of what happened to Adil, Bilal, and Samir on that ridge so many years ago. The tent, despite being buried under snow for over a decade, remained structurally intact. There were no claw marks, no rips or gashes from a bear or snow leopard, predators known to roam these high-altitude regions. The zipper on the tent's entrance wasn't torn open or forcefully broken. Instead, it was half unzipped, as if someone had calmly opened it from the inside. No gear was scattered, no signs of panic, no blood, no torn clothing or makeshift weapons, not even a hint that the campers had tried to defend themselves from anything or run. Inside, the sleeping bags were still laid out side by side, undisturbed. Items like the journal, flashlight, gloves, and a half-frozen water bottle were found in exactly the kind of places you'd expect during a quiet night of camping. There were no overturned bags, no sign of a rushed escape or chaos. It looked like three friends had simply gone to bed and never woke up. If an avalanche had swept through, investigators reasoned, the tent would have been flattened or carried downhill, but it stood firm, partial, hidden but not crushed. And if the cold had simply claimed their lives, why weren't the bodies still inside their sleeping bags? Outside the tent, a few faint footprints had been preserved in snow, hardened by years of freezing and melting. But they led nowhere, disappearing just a few steps away. No drag marks, no struggle. Just prints that started and vanished. Wildlife experts were brought in to consult, but they were equally baffled. If an animal had dragged the bodies away, there would have been some sign: torn fabric, blood trails, paw prints. There was nothing. The absence of any predator activity ruled out one of the most obvious dangers of mountain life. The site was so serene that some investigators admitted it felt more like a memorial than a campsite. A quiet echo of lives once lived there, now mysteriously gone. And that stillness was far more haunting than any violent scene could have been. For the families, the lack of struggle added a new dimension to the grief. It wasn't just about how they disappeared. It was why it all happened without resistance. Had the boys left willingly? Had something lured them away? Were they disoriented? Or was it something no science could explain? The peace of the scene, instead of providing comfort, only magnified the unexplainable nature of their vanishing. It left behind not closure, but questions, questions whispered like wind through snow. And while many mountain mysteries involve violence or natural disaster, this one remained silent, still, and unfathomably strange. As if the mountain had invited them in, and quietly, inexplicably, refused to give them back. Perhaps the most unsettling detail discovered at the tent site in 1999, the one that has haunted investigators, mountaineers, and the families of Adil, Bilal, and Samir for years, was this. The footprints around the campsite simply ended. After 12 years of silence, a team of explorers found the frozen tent high on a secluded ridge, still intact, with sleeping bags, personal items, and no signs of struggle. But just outside the tent, partially preserved in the hardened snow, were a few human footprints. They were faint, delicate imprints from heavy boots, frozen like fossils into the icy ground. At first, they seemed to offer hope, finally a trail to follow. But the excitement quickly turned to confusion and then unease. The footprints didn't form a path leading away from the tent or circle around the site in a logical pattern. There were only a handful, as if one or more of the hikers had stepped out briefly. And then, nothing. No return prints, no descent trail, no dragged gear, just empty snow beyond those last steps, untouched by time or human presence. It was as if the hikers had taken a few steps and then vanished. The rescue team retraced the area multiple times, trying to locate where the tracks might pick up again. Drones were flown over the ridge, scanning the white expanse for any sign of a trail hidden under layers of wind-blown snow. But it was useless. The trail ended abruptly, as if someone had been lifted straight off the ground and pulled into the sky. Snow scientists and forensic experts were called in. One theory suggested the rest of the prints had been covered by shifting snow over time, but the surrounding snow was undisturbed, smooth, and uniform. Another idea proposed they had fallen into a crevasse, but the geology of the area didn't support that. It was solid rock beneath the thin snow layer, not glacier ice. Nothing fit. Local villagers, hearing the strange news, began to whisper again about the legend of the silent storm, a tale of wanderers who disappeared during powerful blizzards taken by unseen forces. Many recalled old stories of ghostly footprints that led nowhere and travelers who vanished mid-step into the mists. For the families, the footprints were a gut punch, proof that their sons had indeed stood on that ridge, proof they were alive after the storm, but also a chilling reminder that something unexplained had happened in that place, something beyond snow, cold, or logic. How do three people walk into the snow and not walk out? That haunting image, those lonely footprints ending in a sea of white, became a symbol of the entire mystery. It suggested a moment of transition, a point where reality bent just slightly and the known gave way to the unseen. The mountain had spoken again, not in words, but in silence and snow. And in that silence, the question echoed louder than ever. Where did they go? As news of the frozen tent discovery spread across the valleys in 1999, it did more than reignite a cold case. It breathed life into old legends and ghost stories that had long been whispered among villagers living in the shadow of the Karakoram. For the locals, the mystery of the three missing friends, Adil, Bilal, and Samir, was more than just a tragedy. It was a chilling echo of something they had heard before. The legend of the silent storm, hope and despair, between reality and denial. Adil's mother refused to touch his room. His shoes remained by the door, his coat still hung on the wall hook. Every morning she opened his window, letting the mountain air in, whispering prayers into the silence. She believed that if the storm could take him suddenly, perhaps the mountain could just as suddenly return him. Bilal's father, a retired schoolteacher, began journaling each day as a letter to his son. He wrote about politics, village gossip, the changing seasons, anything to keep the connection alive. His notebook became a kind of lifeline, his belief inked onto every page. You'll read this one day when you're back. Samir's younger sister, only 10 at the time, grew up watching her parents silently stare out the window every winter. They'd scan the horizon as snow began to fall, looking for shadows in the mist, imagining they might spot 3 figures returning home at last. Holidays, birthdays, and anniversaries passed by like ghosts, marked not with celebration, but with candlelight vigils and prayers for answers. The uncertainty was cruel. With no body, no grave, and no closure, the families were unable to mourn properly. People around them eventually moved on, but they couldn't. Some neighbors tried to comfort them by saying, maybe they died peacefully, while others offered spiritual explanations. The mountain took them for a reason, or Perhaps they crossed into another realm. But to the families, none of these answers mattered. What mattered was the not knowing. Were they cold? Were they alive and waiting to be rescued? Had they found shelter, living off the grid, too far from civilization to return? The possibilities were endless, and each one offered a fresh wound of uncertainty. Over the years, hope shifted. It didn't vanish, it simply changed form. At first, the families hoped for a full return. Later, they just prayed for answers. Even a single clue would help: a watch, a photograph, a torn piece of cloth. Something. Anything. But the mountain remained silent, and the world moved on. By the time 12 years had passed, many people had forgotten the story. But the families hadn't. They still left porch lights on during stormy nights. They still paused every time a news reporter mentioned missing hikers. They still waited. And when, in 1999, a tent was discovered frozen and untouched in the upper ridges of the mountains, the hope that had dimmed over a decade sparked to life again. Not closure, perhaps, but something real, something that finally whispered, "They were here. You were right to keep believing." 12 long years after the mysterious disappearance of Adil, Bilal, and Samir, the mountains remained quiet, guarding their secrets beneath layers of snow and silence. But in the summer of 1999, something extraordinary happened. A team of experienced mountaineers, exploring an uncharted ridge in the Karakoram Range, far from any known trail, made a chilling discovery that would reopen one of the most haunting, unsolved mysteries in the region. As the mountaineers climbed higher, they reached a narrow ledge surrounded by sharp rocks and hidden by years of snowdrift. It was a place so remote and treacherous that few, if any, had ever dared to step foot there. But that day, the snow had partially melted, revealing what looked like the edge of a weathered fabric, flapping slightly in the cold breeze. Curious and cautious, the team approached and began digging through the packed snow. What they uncovered made the air feel even colder. A tent, worn, half-buried, but unmistakably preserved by the frozen climate. The structure was old but intact, its poles still in place, the zip halfway down. It was as if time had stopped. Inside the tent were 3 sleeping bags neatly laid out, a small camping stove, and some personal belongings: an old wristwatch, a faded photograph of the 3 friends smiling in the sunlight, and a nearly full metal water bottle frozen solid. But the most unsettling part: there were no bodies. Everything appeared undisturbed. There were no signs of panic or a hasty escape, no claw marks, no blood, no broken gear. Just silence, as if the 3 boys had stepped out of the tent and vanished into thin air. Authorities were immediately contacted. A rescue and forensics team was flown in, and soon the news reached the families. Emotions ran high. Some cried with relief at the long-awaited confirmation that the boys had at least reached this high point. Others were overwhelmed by new questions. What had happened to them after that moment? The forensic team examined the site thoroughly. The tent's age and weathering were consistent with a structure abandoned over a decade ago. Curiously, the area surrounding the tent had a few footprints, but they led only a short distance before vanishing into untouched snow. No trail, no evidence of a fall, no indication of where they went next. Locals who heard the story began whispering,